Hey, welcome in.
Welcome to the Arrowhead Addict podcast.
We are here coming to you live. The Kansas City Chiefs are going to the Super Bowl. You only win a Super Bowl 2 times every 5 years, right? Oh! The warm-up act is over. Let's bring in Melissa Etheridge, massive Chiefs fan. Melissa,
Super Bowl champion, 2-time Pro Bowler, and Trent Green. Trent Green, how you doing?
Hey, what's going on, guys?
Anybody? He picked it up! He picked it up! He's gonna score! We'll see you next week, but until then, as always, go Chiefs.
Welcome into the Arrowhead Addict podcast. My name is Bryce Carter. I'm joined by my good friend, Christian Ainsworth. This is the Intangibles. And it has been a while since we have been here together. In fact, Christian, the last time I spoke with you was before the AFC Championship game. Just some kind of circumstances where you got the stomach bug and I did the show alone. And then we had everyone live from Radio Row all week during the Super Bowl. I don't think we really missed much.
No, basically nothing happened since we've talked last, right? Like Offseason isn't on fire.
Yeah.
Nobody's jumped off of buildings. I mean, we're good, right?
Well, everything was great, but then one game happened and now everything is terrible and has never been worse. And frankly, heads need to roll. That is how we live and die on the internet. The coaching staff has no idea what they're doing. We need to fire multiple coaches. They're scared. They don't know how to coach these players. And frankly, maybe Andy Reid should just step down. Not even be fired. Just step down, according to some people on the internet.
Oh, yeah, of course. Patrick Mahomes isn't in the GOAT discussion anymore. Like, Brady never lost a game by double digits, so that kind of kicked him out of it. And then
it's better to lose in the wild card than the Super Bowl. A real thing that a real sports publication that is wildly followed said today on the internet is that, like, Tom Brady actually showed us that it's better to lose in the wild card than in the championship round. So
yeah, I love losing early. Well, it's the MJ comparison, right? Like, hey, MJ didn't go to a title for the first 10 years of his career or something crazy. And then it's like, no, but he got 3 in a row and then 3 in a row again. It's like, no, that's all nonsense talk as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, a completely normal day on the internet, but it's not been normal around here for a little bit because of just the Chiefs off season and how long it rolls. So we're going full off-season mode today. We'll have a little bit of analysis about the game. We'll talk a little bit about what happened. Obviously, I think we've all kind of burned the tape on that for the most part. But we'll kind of relate it to the offseason plan, and then we're going full offseason. We're going to start talking about what the Chiefs have resource-wise here, and then we're going to break down the roster's positions of needs. In case you haven't picked up on it, the Intangibles, that part of the reason why we're called that is because we're very draft-heavy here. So starting next week, we will be starting to – basically what we're going to do is we're going to go through position by position. We won't do a single position for a whole show. We'll combine some of them, but we'll go position by position on the Chiefs roster, talk about what's on the roster, what's exiting the roster, some potential free agent fits, and then some draft fits as well for the team, and kind of some day 1, day 2, day 3 targets as well. So we're not just going to talk about first rounders. And as we get closer and closer to the draft, we'll be doing mocks. We'll be talking about the big board. My big board is coming out on Sunday morning. That's my top 50 players. The Arrowhead Addict big board, it's tailored towards the Chiefs. So you're not going to see any quarterbacks, some emphasis on players that meet our thresholds. So for instance, like Will Campbell, he's an offensive lineman. He played tackle at LSU. He's going to have shorter arms. The Chiefs are going to look at him like a guard. So like I have him listed as interior offensive lineman instead of offensive tackle. So that big board will be going live on Sunday. So it's draft season here, which, it's Valentine's Day. It's a romantic time of year. I love the drafts. Like the draft, it gives me heart eyes. So we're very excited to get all of our draft content going here. You're going to want to stick around on the show to hear all of our draft takes.
Yeah, 100%. Like that's whenever we talked about making the podcast from the beginning, we were like draft. That's what we did at the last company that we worked for. And we had a podcast together. We completely compiled all of our picks, all of our prospects, did our own analysis. So we've been at this a while. Yeah, cannot wait to get into the offseason and actually go through these prospects.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention too, the big board, those will also have hyperlinks to player profiles as we write them. Right now, I've only got one because I just haven't really had time, and I just got re-access to the film database for college football prospects. So we'll be taking a look at those too. So lots of content coming your way when it comes to the draft. But real quick, we do kind of need to talk about how the season ended. I talked about this on the post-game show. A lot of people fail to realize this, but really there's only one team every year in the NFL that ends the season happy. Maybe you were a bad team that kind of surged at the end. Like, think about the Carolina Panthers, right? Like, vibes are an all-time low. They kind of have a nice little resurgence there at the end of the year. Maybe they end the season happy because they've got draft capital, etc. But for the most part, one team gets to leave the NFL season thrilled with the outcome, and that's the Eagles. And also, what tends to happen is because the Eagles won the Super Bowl, everything they did was right. Every single roster move that they made, no misses whatsoever. And everything else that the Chiefs did was a total failure. Of course, we're putting our tongues firmly in our cheeks when we say that. But there is a lot to kind of unpack from the Chiefs' debacle in New Orleans. There's no real great other way to say it. It was an ass kicking.
Unfortunately, yeah. And I love the way that you put that, where we're like every single thing that the Eagles did was right and everything that the Chiefs did leading up is wrong. It's like there are so many people, especially on Twitter, one of the most toxic environments on the face of the planet. Like, it seems like every single mistake or every single decision that the Chiefs made during the regular season was like this catastrophic mistake. Like, how could Brett Veach not know that the three picks that he drafted for left tackle weren't going to work out, and they were going to have to put left guard, like Joe Thuney, at left tackle? It's like, yeah, it's easy to see that in hindsight, but as you're going through the season, like, these micro decisions, yeah, they play a part, but it's like Chiefs still had one of the best cores in the league of players, and they made it to the last game. Like, how are we getting so worked up about this? Like, they were going to do something that had never been done before in the history of the game, and they couldn't get it done. Congratulations. That's literally every other team in NFL history. Like,
yeah. And one thing that I tried to point out on the post-game show too is that the Eagles are a team in a much different space in their roster and kind of the situations that they've had. Now, they are a very, very well-run organization. Their owner is very willing to spend cash. They have a ton of void money. If you go look at the cap hits for some of their biggest players this year, it's all like 1.6 million, 1.3 million. So they push all those levers. And obviously Howie Roseman's a great GM. But there's also a team that has had 2 picks inside the top 10 in the last 4 or 5 years. One was of their own doing, the year that they really kind of completed out with Doug Peterson and Carson Wentz. And then another savvy move where basically the Saints trade back into the first round, and then the Saints suck the next year and they get to draft Jalen Carter, which, by the way, Jalen Carter was a risk. He was the best player in that draft. I think most people thought that as far as pure talent goes, but because of some off the field issues, which they've been able to manage, they wind up with another star. It's a very different team building mentality. Oh, and by the way, Jalen Hurts is still on rookie contract money. That quarterback contract really hasn't kicked in. So it's a very different roster. So rather than worrying about that, I think you just got to start at the playoffs. They expose your weaknesses. You find what the fatal flaws are in your team when you lose in the playoffs. And you hit on it a little bit there. As someone in the chat's already hitting at it, Gary is here. I think you have to start with tackle as being one of the reasons why we're sitting here and talking about the Chiefs not winning the Super Bowl. One of the things that I think is most important to point out about tackle too is it made them worse at 2 positions, right? Left tackle was the obvious problem, but the other problem was left guard. You take an all-pro left guard and take him out of that position, and Caliendo was dreadful. In fact, I think Nate Taylor said that they were considering putting Kingsley Suamataia in at left guard. He didn't eventually go in. I think they just let him Caliendo finish it up, but it made them weaker at 2 spots.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back as far as the offense goes. Like, we could talk about Mahomes, we can talk about the skilled players, which I think we're going to in a minute as well. But when you really look at that offensive line and you go, hey, this defensive line we're going up against has Sweat, it has The guy you just talked about, that name is escaping me.
Nolan Smith, Milton Williams, Jalen Carter, dudes.
Jordan Davis.
Yeah,
like,
dudes all over.
Yes, like multiple early to mid first round picks on the defensive line. We knew it was going to be a different game than the last time we played them. And I think that when you have that, we talked about going into the season, right? Kingsley Suamataia and what our expectations of him were, as well as Wanye Morris, and they were not super high. This is not like this came out of nowhere and blindsided them. But I don't think that they expected that there was going to be no moves that they could make to make an impact late in the season. And as far as offseason check marks go, and we're making our list, like a lot of people are going to have re-sign Trey Smith really high. A lot of people are going to have Nick Bolton re-signing really high. It's like, for me, left tackle is it. It is find a left tackle, which is easier said than done.
Well, to backtrack a little bit, right? Like this has been a long-term problem, and I'll listen to a lot of things. We try to be pretty honest and pretty critical here. It's not all red and gold pom-poms here. If you want that, there's other shows for that. But what I won't listen to is that the Chiefs didn't try to address left tackle historically, right? They had a freak situation where they had two good tackles who still had plenty of years left in them. Basically, both had their careers end in like a few months span and had to cut both of them. They drafted Andrew Wiley, who was a decent right tackle for them, good enough to win the Super Bowl. They made a move to go and acquire Orlando Brown. I can't touch reality with some Chiefs fans on Orlando Brown. You would think that this was the worst player that has ever existed to play left tackle. There are so many people that just think Orlando Brown is god awful. There's people who think that Donovan Smith was better than Orlando Brown, which is not
crazy.
Orlando Brown was fine. He wanted too much money, and he cost himself a lot of money. I would have loved Orlando Brown at the number he's at for the Bengals. The number that the Chiefs were offering him was a little strong, but like it or not, that would have made you better in two spots. The last time the Chiefs' run game was really good, Orlando Brown was left tackle. The run game struggled in 2023, and it struggled this year. Part of that's running back, but part of that is like Orlando Brown was a great run blocker. He definitively was. Pass protection was a struggle. It's easier to find a right tackle. Maybe no one ever really brings this up, but maybe the right answer was trying to keep Andrew Wiley and keep him at right tackle or something. But they make the move for Donovan Smith. They make the move for Wanye Morris, who after I still believe that they were trying to trade up to get Anton Harrison in that draft. Wanye Morris is the next tackle drafted. Tyler Steen gets drafted, but he's a guard. He played tackle at Alabama. And then this year they invest another, a second round pick into Kingsley Suamataia. The one area that I will be a little bit critical of is I cannot get behind rolling into camp with Wanye and Kingsley as the starters. We talked about it for plenty of hours on this podcast into August and September and said like, hey, this is a risk. And they didn't have a better option. They went and got DJ Humphries, but that was too little too late. And obviously that didn't end up working out. Donovan Smith sat out there unsigned all offseason. I think that there's a reason for that. There's a guy who's won 2 Super Bowls and started a Super Bowl and helped win it. But do I think that we're talking about the Super Bowl 3-peat champion Kansas City Chiefs if Donovan Smith is on the team? I'm not sure. But I definitely think it would have not been the ass kicking that it was.
Well, and let me ask you this then, because I have a very, very definitive opinion on it already. A lot of people were banging the table for DJ Humphries to go in about halfway through that Eagles game and switching Joe Thuney back to left guard because Caliendo wasn't exactly doing the best. Joe Thuney, same thing. You move him back to your position. To me, that's just too. You have to make that decision the 2 weeks before you go in.
Yeah, you're down 24-0. So who the hell cares at that point, right?
That's also true.
At that point, you might try Creed Humphrey out of the slot, whatever. At that point, you're down 24-0. Just try something, anything. It's kind of like you see sometimes, obviously this is not the situation, but sometimes you just see teams put in the backup just to see if they can kind of spark something to happen, right? At that point, just try anything. They chose to stay with Caliendo, whatever. At that point,
I don't think it would have made a big enough difference to change the entire game. Genuinely, we haven't seen DJ Humphries a lot, but you make that switch. Let's say Joe Thuney goes back to his all-star guard potential. It's DJ Humphries is still a big question mark.
Yeah, and let's be clear too. Juwan Taylor and Trey Smith were getting their ass kicked too, All right.
Yes,
This was a whole
100%.
this was a whole team effort. Now, I will say I do think that the summation of the left side being super leaky and then the right side struggle. Like part of the thing is like Juwan Taylor's getting his ass kicked. Well, you can't help both sides, right? You can't chip and protect both sides. Then you're getting into 2-man routes, right? Like that is just not possible. So I do think you get Tooney in there that kind of raises the floor of the interior. Maybe you can start helping Trey or Juwan Taylor some. But at the end of the day, like DJ Humphries, it was a nice swing. Too little, too late. And I think, we'll get into left tackle and some options down the road as we kind of analyze that position. But I'm not going to say that he will never be a productive player for the Chiefs, but it didn't work out this year. And at some point they decided to go to Joe Tooney, and that ended up being a problem. So one of the fatal flaws of the team, one of the reasons that the Chiefs are not Super Bowl champions is clearly left tackle. The next one we hit on just a little bit there, the lack of skill player talent. While the protection was rough, there were a lot of images and clips from that game that you can see the Chiefs receivers are just blanketed. A really good secondary for the Eagles, but you've got 35-year-old Travis Kelce out there. You've got DeAndre Hopkins, who's 32. You've got Juju Smith-Schuster, who moves like he's 32, even though he's not. The Chiefs were just totally suffocated by the coverage units. They did not do anything. The Eagles did not do any. This wasn't some like genius Spags game plan. This was the Eagles lining up and doing what they've done all year. And they just said, hey, our guys are better than you. We can get pressure with 4 and cover with 7. And we don't think you can beat it. And most of this in garbage time, but there was one guy who could, and he also happened to be the fastest player on the field, and Xavier Worthy. But the skill player talent, and he's kind of been shielded from some of this. And again, we'll get into the analysis of next year in a little bit. But Hollywood Brown too, this guy was supposed to be a difference maker for this roster. It was part of the reason why we whistled away some of the offensive woes throughout the year. He wasn't doing any favors, right? He wasn't just out there making a difference on this offense. That's supposed to be one of your guys who can win quickly. So when protection breaks down, you have a fast option, right? And the skill player talent just wasn't there.
No, it wasn't. And part of that is the game plan as well. You talked about it, Juju Smith-Schuster, DeAndre Hopkins, Travis Kelce. Like one thing you thought about when the Chiefs offense was at its peak, it's like there's speed everywhere. Like the slowest guy on the roster is either Travis Kelce or Demarcus Robinson. Like that's the floor. And Travis Kelce years ago when he's still, sort of at his peak. It's like this is a completely different offense. And what you couldn't do was what the Chiefs kept trying to do. There were multiple times where they would go out and they would run. Like I think it was the 10th play of the game. It was the 10th or 11th. They run play action and they have 3 guys run routes down the field. And Eagles only rushed 4, dropped 7 back in coverage, and we hadn't run a run play yet. And it's like if you're putting people in positions to succeed, and the 3 guys you have running routes are Juju Smith-Schuster, DeAndre Hopkins, and Travis Kelce, all who run probably a 4.6 40 at this point in their career, maybe slower than that. It's like that's not a winning game plan. Like nobody is expecting none of those linebackers are stepping up because they think you're going to run the ball. There's 0 run plays had been run up to that point in the game. And you might be able to get away with that if Isaiah Pacheco hadn't been injured all year and was still insanely quick and still had that burst, and you had Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce from a few years ago, and then McCole Hardman or Sammy Watkins out there. And it's like, okay, yes, you might be able to beat 7 with 3 if those are your 3 guys. Unfortunately, those were not the 3 guys out there. Like it's you expect somebody to be able to step up, and putting all that on Xavier Worthy's plate that early in his career is just it's too much.
Yeah, and you hit upon something else too. Do you think that the Eagles defense or their defensive coordinator spent a second worrying about the Chiefs run game?
No.
Mm-mm. They probably worried about Mahomes scrambling a little bit. They probably had some plans for that because it's just an element that you've got to pay attention into the playoffs. Isaiah Pacheco, whether it be injury or regression, you just go back and watch the highlights from the previous Super Bowl run against the 49ers. It's like, who is this guy? Like this guy is so So I do have faith that maybe that player can come back. But when your primary trait is burst, not vision, and then you lost the super strength of the interior offensive line that was helping open up things for him, he looked really bad. And then obviously, like Kareem Hunt, what he did was really helpful for this roster, and they really needed it. But like, he doesn't put the fear of God in you. And then, hey, you ran the ball 3 times before halftime. Let's be clear. I don't think running the ball more. I don't think DJ Humphries. I don't think Rashee Rice. I'm not sure that any of these players, like if you just add one of them, would have changed things for the outcome of this game. Now, maybe if you start like, hey, maybe DJ Humphries comes in and he looks average, and Rashee Rice, and Isaiah Pacheco is the real version of himself, maybe then we could start talking about this game going differently. Because I do think the defense played well enough to at least be in this game. I think, there's a real situation that the defense holds to 24, 26 points around there. That's enough against a really good offense for the Chiefs to win the game. They just did that against the Bills, and it was enough, but it was not enough for this offense. And that's ultimately why they got their asses kicked, right? And I again, just going back to the playmakers, this has to be an overhaul at the position, especially because we do not know when Rashee Rice is going to be back, or we cannot count on Rashee Rice just being the full version of himself, right? We hope that that's the case. But like, what was one of his best traits? Acceleration. He got the ball when he flipped those hips and started moving upfield. It was explosive, right? So you got to go into this with like, okay, we've got one piece that we feel really great about, and it's Xavier Worthy. The rest is basically all question marks. So there's a lot to unpack there at the skill position player. And that's not, we're still waiting on a decision from Travis Kelce. It doesn't really matter what the choice is there, right? Like, he's either going to be here or it's not. Cap space wise, there's some things there. But let's get into, so I think those are the most obvious ones. The skill position players, the left tackle. What about cornerback? I do think that the cornerback depth beyond Trent McDuffie, we saw, just Jalen Watson did something really admirable in coming back and pushing himself to be ahead of schedule. But there were some moments there that he kind of struggled, right? And I mean, even Trent McDuffie had some rough moments in this game. AJ Brown's a mismatch for him. Obviously, we've seen that in 2 games. But you've got Jahan Dotson, like, blazing past him on a wheel route. You've got some moments there with Devontae Smith. The second cornerback depth, I do think that that is an area of concern. And also, I'll throw out the 4-man pass rush, right? Like, the Eagles did not feel any pressure in this game unless the Chiefs were bringing a blitz, and the Eagles had good answers for the blitz.
Yeah, well, and we saw, not this past year, but the year before, where you have L'Jarius Sneed and you have Trent McDuffie. And it's like L'Jarius Sneed, for all of his flaws, and he would give up 1 or 2 big plays a game, and we'd be A-okay with it because he's shadowing their number 1 receiver. It's like, we don't have that guy that can go up against, and this is going to sound atrocious, but a Mac Hollins or an A.J. Brown or any of these big body wide receivers. You saw a lot in that game, Justin Reed being on A.J. Brown. And part of the reason for that is because he's a little bit stronger. He's not going to get out-muscled at the catch point. It's like the cornerback depth for this team, if you can't trust Williams to be able to come in and take that role, which is, I think, exactly what they brought him in for, as like a long, athletic, strong DB that can kind of cover those bigger guys. If you can't trust him to come in, then we have nobody to cover him. I mean, I love Justin Reed as much as the next guy. Putting him against A.J. Brown for the entire game, he was going to get cooked. It was just a matter of time.
Yeah, and I think, like, one thing, too, is, we really love Trent McDuffie, and he's a great player, but I think he was at his best in the slot, right? So that's something this offseason we can talk about. I think you feel good going into next season with Jalen Watson being one of your outside corners, especially another offseason for him to heal up and kind of get back to that performance he had at the beginning of the year. But I think you try to get Trent McDuffie back in the slot. Shamari Connor is not keeping me from putting Trent McDuffie in the slot, right?
No.
His role is not so important. I do love some of the runs, defense snaps from him, but that's not a player that we have to plan around, right? So those outside cornerbacks that we talk about in the draft, or like Charvarius Ward's going to be back on the market, I'd be interested to see if they did that. I'm not sure if they would, given that he's a little bit older now. But there's some things there too. And then we hit on it. The 4-man pass rush. They still kind of struggled in this game. Now, this is a great offensive line that they were going against, but it didn't feel like the impact of Chris Jones and Charles Omenihu or George Karlaftis was as felt in this game as it might have been.
Yeah, and I'll give CJ a little bit of an excuse with that neck injury, trying to stop that play, but it still seemed like, okay, somebody's got to be able to step up. We're playing this defensive line an absurd amount of money. Like, somebody's got to be able to step up. And this upcoming season, we're not going to have probably Tershawn Wharton. I think he priced his way out of Kansas City, which good for him, man. Missouri S&T grad. Like, if you're going to give it up for somebody, like, fantastic player, really developed, but like, this is not a problem that is going to be taken care of in the offseason, I would imagine, unless we hit on a draft pick or FAU steps up. But in that game, I agree. I didn't really see George Karlaftis on the field that much. I mean, he's kind of the effort guy anyway, so you kind of need those DBs to take something away.
A really bad matchup for him with Lane Johnson.
Yes, it was.
A guy who's an absolute technician, who's not going to like kind of give up the arch and kind of like lose those late hustle reps. And I mean, man, the Chris Jones plan of having him like be sideways on the tush push, that. I mean, hey, give it to them. They tried something. And again, the defense played well enough to win this game, but these were all flaws that like ended up being the difference in this team. Lack of skill player talent, the left tackle, second cornerback, the 4-man pass rush. These are all massive positions that are huge draft capital, right? Like what goes in the first round in the first 15 picks? Tackles, edge rushers, corners, skill position players. Hey, good news. The Chiefs got the quarterback figured out. So that's good. That's one you can cross up the list. Quite frankly, they're not going to be able to fix all these things, right? Like it's just not possible. We're going to talk about what the top needs are and some things they can do to help it. I think one thing, and we're going to shift to the positivity side here in a second, but one thing that you can tell yourself is like, hey, you're getting Rashee Rice back at some point. He looked like a wide receiver one. And, again, garbage time disclaimer here. Xavier Worthy looked great in that game. Xavier Worthy looked great in the postseason. And I just hope that they will trust him more and more to run real routes down the field, which is something that they have to get better at. But, hey, if you're going to pass the ball down the field, you got to have protection to do it, right? And even on some of those plays that they did connect on the deep field, Mahomes is still getting clobbered. So it's something that is why we're sitting here talking about the Chiefs not being Super Bowl champions. These flaws, they were just too much to overcome at some point. And credit to the Chiefs, they beat a really good Bills team to be able to get this far. And like, you want to know what feels really bad? Watching the Chiefs get like absolutely clobbered in the Super Bowl and knowing that team eliminated you in the Super Bowl. So, yeah, like there's a lot that ended up causing this, and we'll dig into it more and more as we get closer to it. But these were the flaws. These were the things that brought him down. Speaking of the Bills, they had a coach, Marv Levy. In 1994, the Bills lost the Super Bowl. Newsflash, they only lose Super Bowls because they've never won one, in case you're wondering. But after the Bills' 1994 Super Bowl loss, Marv Levy read a poem I believe his wife suggested to him. He read this poem to the locker room afterwards to a dejected group of Bills players who had just lost the Super Bowl. I'm not going to read the whole poem, but one of my favorite draft analysts, Joe Marino, he reads this and he calls it the Levy Grail, which is like when your team is dead, you read this poem. And after I read this, we are only going to talk about positive things for the Chiefs going forward. So we're waving the negativity away. This is only positivity here. So the poem goes, "Fight on, my men. I am hurt, but I am not slain. I'll lay me down and bleed a while, and then I'll rise and fight again." The Kansas City Chiefs Levy Grail is here. Here are the positive things about the Chiefs. You have the best quarterback head coach combination in the NFL. Still, bar none. Bad game for Andy Reid. Bad game for Patrick Mahomes. If those guys become available, 31 other teams are interested. A coaching staff that has been to 3 straight Super Bowls and won 2 of them remains intact. Dave Merritt's still here. Steve Spagnuolo's still here. Andy Reid's still here. There's a lot of really good coaches on this team. The defensive line coach, right? Like a lot of really good coaches are still on this team, and they didn't get plucked. Look at the Lions. The Lions have goose egg Super Bowl appearances, and like their coaching staffs, not just their coordinators, like their assistant coaches, their positional coaches have all been rated. So you have that to look forward to. You have 4 picks in the top 100, including 3 in the top 65. That's beneficial. That luxurious Snead trade, it's coming through here. Chiefs right now, this number actually changed. I wrote down $11 million in cap space. That's since changed. It's like $133,000, which, hey, that would be a lot of money in my bank account. It's not necessarily a lot of cap space, but the Chiefs do have a lot of levers when it comes to creating cap flexibility. Probably the number one thing is going to be extending Joe Thuney. He has a $27 million cap hit this year. I don't think that he's going to be playing on that. You can extend that out, bring that cap hit. Travis Kelce, whether you want to add a void year to his contract, whether he retires or not, if he does retire, that would free up at about $17 million in cap space. Obviously, the Chiefs are not cutting Travis Kelce, but there's some flexibility if he does choose to retire. The Mahomes contract, his cap hit is $66 million this year. They will pull a lever there as well. So there's a lot of options. The Chiefs can easily get to $40 or $50 million in cap space. Now, some of that has to come from Clark Hunt, doing some cash on hand, but that's certainly possible. Some other positives. You have the best center in the NFL. Creed Humphrey's undoubtedly the number one center in the NFL. He's here. He's locked up, just coming off his first season as a first-team All-Pro. Great thing to have. Leader of that offensive line to build around. You have Xavier Worthy, a wide receiver. I keep getting told on the internet that Brett Veach can't draft wide receivers, and yet he's drafted 2 wide receivers who led their teams in receiving. I shouldn't say in receiving because I think Kelce did both those years, but were the top targets on offense. Xavier Worthy is an emerging star. Oh yeah, Rashee Rice, who was also drafted by Brett Veach. Excuse me. Xavier Worthy, who is the emerging star on this offense as well, is here. Your wide receiver 1, Rashee Rice, will be back. And besides defensive tackle, this roster can basically line up and play tomorrow at defense, even with all the free agents being gone. Defensive tackle, there's a few too many holes. But your starting edges, George Karlaftis, Felix Anudike-Uzomah, Mike Dana, Chris Jones. Your linebackers are Drew Tranquill and Leo Chanel. You've got Shamari Connor, Brian Cook, Jaden Hicks at the safety. You've got all of the same corners returning. Like this defense is still in a pretty good place. Now, you'd like to have Nick Bolton back. You'd like to have Charles Omenihu back. You'd like to have Justin Reed back. But this is a defense that can line up and play today. And that's really important because I think we just spent a lot of time talking about the offense and how there's some work that needs to be done there. Guess what? You have capital. You can have some flexible cap space. And you've got a defense that you might be able to take 3 or 4 offensive players in your first 5 or 6 picks.
Yeah, it's super convenient. I love what you talked about with the defense, where you have guys like Jaden Hicks stepping up because they can absolutely do that. We've seen him take steps forward during the regular season. And I think that's going to be the biggest key to a productive offseason for the Chiefs. It's like you've done very, very well in drafting your defense. Very well. Like, say what you want about the Felix Anudike-Uzomah pick. He's making plays in the playoffs. He's taking good snaps. He's playing well, especially late into the season. It seems like your defensive backs are going to be okay. Like, you'd like to have one more corner probably. It's like, but everything else seems like it's going to be okay. Now you can look at first, second, third round picks here, all in the top 60. It's like, hey, let's go find some more pieces for Patrick Mahomes. Like, there's going to be free agent left tackles that we can talk about, and we probably will at some point. It's like, but when you look at the roster, you say, hey, we're going to be down a right guard. Okay, well, Trey Smith, don't get me wrong, fantastic. It's like he's going to be a little bit of a loss, but like you're going to have money for left tackle. You're going to have money to go outside more weapons. Like Travis Kelce, you probably like to see him back for one more year, even if it's not at his current value. Maybe he does a restructure or something and gets that cap hit down. But it's like Chiefs are in a fantastic spot. And one more thing, you talked about the coaching staffs of these other teams getting just stolen away from them. Eagles lost their offensive coordinator. They got Saquon Barkley, his best season of all time. One of the greatest running back seasons of all time. Offensive coordinator, gone. Okay, so as much as we love the Eagles roster and how much they showed how dominant they are, payment's going to come due on Jalen Hurts. They're not going to have their offensive coordinator. I still don't think Nick Sirianni is a fantastic head coach. He's done a lot of winning, but you don't really know exactly how much he's contributing to that. It's like,
yeah, I'm not like Any other roster, I'll hear it. The Eagles roster is just so stupid, man. Like,
Oh, it is crazy.
think about how many, like Quinion Mitchell, one of the best corners in the NFL. Cooper DeJean, one of the best slot corners in the NFL. Jalen Carter, one of the best interior defensive linemen in the NFL. They're in their second and first year in the NFL. What the hell, man? Like it's just crazy. And like Mylott has still got plenty of time left. Lane Johnson's getting older. The interior, I don't think it's as big of a strength as it used to be. Like, I don't know if they'll like bring back Mekhi Becton, but I mean, I do get what you're saying though, that like the Chiefs, and just to kind of re-highlight the Levy Grail thing, like the Chiefs, I saw some stupid one of those acronym JPA MLA Dove Kleiman accounts say, "Welcome to Cap Hell, Chiefs." It's like, no,
yes,
the Chiefs are not in Cap Hell. Like they're not. First off, part of the reason why the Chiefs aren't in Cap Hell is because they don't really deal with dead money. A lot of teams that are in Cap Hell are teams that like are like the Saints, without paying a single player on their roster, are in the hole. They have to clear cap space just to have a draft class, right? Like that's Cap Hell. That will not be what the Chiefs are doing here. And really real quick before we get into kind of hierarchy, the free agency and draft needs for this team, I just want to kind of put a bow on what this year has been and where the team is going. And I think that Patrick and Matt talked about this yesterday on the OG Hour. I think that we are entering a new phase for this team, for Patrick Mahomes, and this roster construction. Chapter 1, you have a high-flying offense. Patrick Mahomes, 50 touchdowns, 5,000. MVP, Kelsey, Tyreek in their prime. You have Sammy Watkins in there. And they really kind of took the league by storm. And it really just felt like, hey, I need the defense to get 1 or 2 stops, and we'll win this game. Then that second wave happens, and it kind of almost coincided with trading Tyreek Hill. I do think it started a little bit before that. If you remember that final year with Tyreek, they really struggled on offense for a couple of weeks, and they kind of started to figure out of like, hey, we've got to check the ball down. We can't just keep taking these deep shots. Teams are playing these shells against them. The second window became Mahomes' efficiency. He wins an MVP in 2022. A lot of it's yak. A lot of it's low average depth of target. The defense slowly gets better. And the last 2 years have been an efficient offense and a great defense. And now I think it's time for the third chapter. And pretty much as we go throughout this whole offseason, I'm really going to err towards the side of get younger. I don't need to see another year of Derek Nottie. Not that I think Derek Nottie's bad. He played on a good defense. I'm not necessarily sure I need to see Tershawn Wharton back. I don't need to bring Charvarius Ward back. Like, they need to start giving younger players the opportunity to play. We don't need to see McCole Hardman again. I don't need to see another season of Juju Smith-Schuster. Those guys were great Chiefs. Thanks for helping win Super Bowls here. But they need to start getting younger. Obviously, always a huge advocate of trading down in the draft, getting more picks. But this team, probably one of the biggest questions it has to answer is, what does life look like on offense after Travis Kelce? Part of the thing that's weird about Travis Kelce this year is like he played an insane amount of snaps. If he is going to come back, they've got to get him down to like a 30 to 40% snap guy instead of being one of the leading snap getters on offense. And, like I do think that there's some encouraging signs there with Noah Gray. Let me put it to you this way. There are very few plays this year that Travis Kelce made that I felt like Noah Gray couldn't make. Some of the route running and the flexibility and the savviness there, I think that was some Travis Kelce special stuff. But there's a lot of stuff that like Noah Gray, as far as just like catch the ball and run a route, like I think that he could have done probably. So this is version 3.0. This is, the third chapter in that Mahomes story. And we saw this with Tom Brady, right? At first, he was a game manager with a great defense. Then comes that Randy Moss era where they're slinging the ball over the field with Gronkowski. And then there's kind of that third era that's a lot like what Patrick Mahomes' era was, where it's like pretty good defense, great run game, just knowing how to win those close games. So this offseason, I think it's a crucial one.
Yeah, 100%. And it would be really nice if the Chiefs could get what the Eagles got, where the number 1 and the number 2 defensive back fall to you in the first and second round of a draft, or we somehow, sneak a pick from a team who's going to get us a top 10. It's like, that's just not the reality. And 100% have to get younger on offense. This is not a team that I think can rely on those older guys anymore. As much as I love DeAndre Hopkins, one of my favorite wide receivers of all time, it's like But also good news, like there are a lot of young, talented players in this draft that you can plug and play in the Chiefs offense, and they're going to make a huge impact. Like we're going to talk about some running backs later that like, hey, you loved Saquon on the Eagles. Like maybe not that, but pretty damn close. Like fantastic players that can step in, be the number 1 running back on the team or the number 2 or number 3 wide receiver on the team, or a utility guy that you can put in if you trust Worthy to step up. It's like, man, there's so much, and I hate to harp on so much good, especially with the loss that we just took, but it's like, man, the Chiefs roster is like in such a great position. We're in a perfect offseason, like very much a team that can come back this upcoming year and make it to the Super Bowl again, enter into that third period of the Chiefs dynasty where we get younger, we get better, and we win those close games. Mahomes already knows how to do that. Like,
yeah, and
too much negativity on Twitter.
Mahomes legacy wise here too. I think it's time to have another one of those MVP caliber seasons. Like,
yes,
since the 2022 MVP, there's a pretty obvious regression in some of the offensive numbers. I think there's reasons for some of that you can explain away, but at some point, like, you would like to see those numbers start going up. Otherwise, it's going to start looking like, hey, this was largely a product of Kelsey and Tyreek Hill. And I don't think that we think that, and I don't think a lot of people think that, but I do think that some people could kind of explain those things away. So they will have to do this. And lastly, I think the coaching staff needs to, again, I'm not calling for heads or anything like that, but I do think that this team is particularly at its best when people doubt them. Like if Travis Kelce retires, there's a narrative there that can get Patrick Mahomes back into the MVP conversation. We saw it was hard for Lamar Jackson to win his third MVP. It starts becoming a narrative award. They chose the narrative over the stats when it came to Josh Allen this year. If Patrick Mahomes, if Travis Kelce retires and he has a big season, like there's your narrative right there. So, and also not to mention, like, hey, the teams in the division are getting better. The Broncos, like they're starting to build some good pieces over there. The Chargers, like it's not going to get easier. This might be a season that's a little bit more like, hey, the AFC West, they don't win it before Thanksgiving, which has been a blessing, but it might be a little bit more of a push. So last thing before we get out of here, though, we're going to do 3 tiers here, like flaming red, huge need. This has to be addressed. A medium need where it's like, anywhere you draft this position or assign a player, no arguments. And then low need. We're going to kind of just go through the positions on this roster and tier where their needs are. So let's start with the most obvious one, quarterback. We're going to put that at a tier 3 need, meaning low need. We'll talk about the quarterback position. I don't think there's much analysis there. Honestly, I'm kind of over the like, oh, if the Chiefs take a running back on day 3, I'm okay with it. Like, screw it. Who cares? Name the last day 3 quarterback that's like really done anything as a backup, right? Like you're going to draft one and maybe hope they develop into a backup. There's plenty of guys. We've seen this team year after year go after some veteran, find a veteran that you feel you're comfortable with being the backup quarterback and move on. No, it does not happen. It has been so long since it's happened that someone's drafted a quarterback and traded them for picks, right? Maybe that happens with
Joe Milton. I know exactly who you're thinking of.
Yeah, which that's kind of a unique situation, but also it hasn't happened. So that was a game against the Bills backup. So we'll chill on that. So quarterback, tier 3 need. Let's start working our way through the backfield here. Running back, tier 2, tier 1 need. What do you think?
I would say tier 1. And I think that's based partially on opportunity with all the great running backs that are in this upcoming draft. But I would also say you can't rely on the guys that you've been relying on and them not being as efficient or being as inefficient as they have been over the past couple of years. Like, I love Isaiah Pacheco. We tend to dog on him a lot. It's like, I don't think he's in that tier 2 running back conversation. I think he's probably tier 3. Kareem Hunt is older. He doesn't have that burst. Like, if you have a counter offensively and you're saying, hey, we want to be able to get big plays, we want to be able to, let our offensive line breathe a little bit. It's like, let them work, let them fight in the trenches. Got to have a good running back. You do that, I think completely changes the dynamic of the offense. Like, you can add wide receivers all day. If nobody thinks you're going to run the football, like, you got no shot. Genuinely.
Yeah, I think I might lean towards a little bit more to a tier 2 need, but I will say they also need 2 backs. right? Because I don't think you're going forward thinking Carson Steele has to be a center piece of your team, whether he's a true fullback or not. Like, this isn't a guy that anybody's game planning around at all. So yeah, they kind of need two. Like, if you told me the Chiefs took someone like Brashard Smith, kind of a third down back out of SMU, or Trevor Etienne, who's kind of got that profile out of Georgia, and they wanted to kind of keep Pacheco in the lead role, I wouldn't be frustrated with it. I do think that there's still a path for a lead back, more of your Quinshon Judkins or someone like that, Caleb Johnson from Iowa, guys who are true 3-down backs. But I can understand a tier 1 need too, because like I think they need more than one, but also they can go do the Samaje Perine thing. If Samaje Perine's back and they take, I'm trying to just name off different guys. If they take Ollie Gordon and then Isaiah Pacheco's here, and then they bring back Samaje Perine, boom, I'm fine with that. So I do like tier 1, tier 2. I don't think it's a 5-alarm fire though. So let's head to the offensive line. Offensive tackle. Tier 1 need?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, if there ever was one.
It's not just left tackle, right? Like, it's not just left tackle.
It's both.
Like Juwan Taylor's on this team next year. So stop. If you're writing, cut Juwan Taylor, I hate him, Chris Collinsworth, blah, blah, blah. He's on this team next year. He's an adequate right tackle. If your offensive line is part of the reason why you lost the Super Bowl, cutting an adequate right tackle doesn't help the problem, in case you're wondering, right?
Yeah.
So if, the Chiefs can start preparing for life after Juwan Taylor, that wouldn't be a bad idea. So if they draft a guy who ends up being the right tackle of the future, that's fine too. Obvious need at left tackle. Quite frankly, double down on left tackle. You want to take Josh Connerly. You want to take Joshua Simmons. You want to take Donovan Jackson, who's a guy who actually has tackle length arms, played at guard most of the time at Ohio State, kicks out and wins a national championship at left tackle. Take a guy like that. That's fine, but you got to double down. I think that was one of the mistakes we talked about, not having a Donovan Smith, not having a DJ Humphries early enough, something like that. Left tackle, 5-alarm fire, tier 1 need.
Yeah, and I love what they did with the interior offensive line with Kingsley Suamataia, where it's like, hey, not that he's the same player as Mekhi Becton, but like somebody you drafted to be your left tackle, it's not working out, like put him at right guard.
Yeah,
and just let
people
him
have gone
freaking
so far.
bully
People have gone so far with the Kingsley Suamataia thing, where like now he's like an absolute moron that won't ever be able to do anything, right? Like, this is a guy who has talent, who has traits. Let's give him an offseason at guard to see how he's going to do. You can't just pay everyone all the time. I know there's a lot of people who want to bring back Trey Smith, but like, you've got to get younger at some of these positions and cheaper. They're paying Creed Humphrey. We just advocated for them to extend Joe Thuney, which I'm absolutely okay with them doing, but you can work at guard. And by the way, when was this offense at its best? When they had good tackle play and Austin freaking Ryder starting at center and Steven Wisniewski, who they signed halfway through the season, and a guy who's a doctor. Okay. Like, that was the starting offensive line, which, like, shout out LDT. Thanks for, doing, yeah, Super Bowl champion. But, like that's part of it. Interior offensive line, I'm going to put at a tier 3 need. I agree. If Tyler Booker sitting there at 32, I think is the best interior offensive lineman in the class, and they decide to take him and say, hey, we're going to keep a strength to strength, I'm okay with that, because I think he's got great intangibles. He's more of a Trey Smith power gap duo sort of blocker, but BPA, best player available, by the way, is what they say. Tier 3 need, though, I'm not super concerned about right guard. I think between Wanye, between Norzad, between Kingsley Suamataia, they've got options, because Norzad could kick out to center or to guard too. So I think that there's a reasonable competition. It's also one of the least valuable positions. It's not the quarterback's blind side. It's a right guard. I'm okay with that.
And people forget about Wanya Morris as well. Like, if Kingsley Suamataia just is absolutely incompetent and can't kick King, like, Wanya Morris has taken snaps at guard.
Yeah, I think ideally he should play tackle next year. Like, you draft a tackle.
I would think so as well.
And Wanya's the backup right tackle. Your rookie left tackle is backup left tackle, and then Ronnie Stanley is your starting left tackle, or whoever your starter is.
Yeah.
Tight end. Let's do this first with Kelsey here. If Kelsey is here next year, where would you put the tight end position?
For me, I don't think it changes all that much. Like, I would still say tier 3. I think there are some guys that you have coming up that you like. The guy we just drafted, I always want to say Jaden Hicks. I know that's not him. Jared Wiley, yes. I think he can be that red zone target that Travis Kelce has not exactly been his entire career, but has shown flashes of. And then you have Noah Gray, who we've seen multiple times throughout the years he's been here. He can step up when needed. Obviously, he's not Travis Kelce, even though that was his comp as soon as he got drafted to the Chiefs and was white and a tight end. It's like, but
and had lots of aura. Please don't forget
that's true.
aura.
He did have aura. He did have good aura, but like
someone might have done that as their take purge. He had one catch this year.
Who knows? Yeah.
Jared Wiley, but he got hurt his first year, like Kelce. By the way,
exactly like Kelce. Wasn't he a quarterback too in college a little bit?
Also true.
Okay. Hey,
yeah,
maybe I'm wrong.
And we'll get through these a little bit quicker because we're bogging down here. But for tight end, I think if Kelce's here, it's a tier 3 need. I think if Kelce's not here, it's a tier 2 need. Simply put, like you can only play so many tight ends. Like Jared Wiley, even before he got hurt, wasn't playing that much. They were running in Peyton Hendershot. Also, I forgot Jody Fortson was here for a little bit. So like, the third tight end, like it's not a big position on this roster. But if Travis Kelce does retire, I think you do want to kind of keep reloading the chamber there. A day 2 tight end might make some sense. Your Gunnar Helms, guys like
Love
that.
him.
Yeah, there's some names there that could be had. I forget the guy's name who had from Miami. I can't remember his name. He had a really good keep on to say Restrepo, but that's the wide receiver. The tight end from Miami had a really good Senior Bowl. There's some guys out there, and I think going forward, you're not going to find an next Travis Kelce. It's going to be more of a traditional kind of like a run the seam, run the flats, those type of things. But that's okay. Like Travis Kelce or Patrick Mahomes played all of his college without like using the tight end at all, right? Like that was that air raid offense. Lastly, wide receiver on the offense. I'm going to put that as a tier 1 need, especially when you factor in DeAndre Hopkins, McCole Hardman, Justin Watson, Juju Smith-Schuster. All those guys are free agents. Juju Smith-Schuster, they're all free agents. Like Arroyo, yes, thank you, Weston Brewer. So I do think that there is a definite need at wide receiver. And like, honestly, as long as the wide receiver market is what it is and the Chiefs are paying the quarterback what it is, they should be taking one every year. There's lots of different flavors of wide receivers this year where you've got the kind of get open guy like Emeka Egbuka. There's some speed with like Tez Johnson, which by the way, Tez Johnson is 10 pounds lighter than Xavier Worthy. So
scary.
You've got Isaiah Bond, who's also from Texas, a speedster about 10 pounds heavier than Xavier Worthy. Hey, there's some nice yak options. Jack Besh from TCU, Trey Harris from Ole Miss. And there's some nice power slots too, like Xavier Restrepo. There's a lot of good options. And, I know Matt Verran was pounding the table for them to get aggressive at the free agent market with Chris Godwin or T Higgins even, or, some guys like that. So, but wide receiver for me, tier 1 need.
I would lean tier 2, and I would only say that because I think you have your number 1 and your number 2 locked up. You're really just looking for depth. Like Rashee Rice, we don't know exactly what he's going to be when he comes back. I think he's a tier 1 wide receiver, an Amon-Ra St. Brown type of player, even if he doesn't do exactly what Amon-Ra St. Brown does. And then you have Xavier Worthy, who I think will take another step forward. He's that chess piece that Andy Reid loves, that like just absolute monster freak that can play down the field, or he can catch it at the line of scrimmage and be the yak, like how Andy Reid loves his receivers. But it's like there's too many holes to say it's a tier 3. It's like, but tier 2 clearly, possibly tier 1.
I like this comment. Savion Williams is like big bodied. He could basically play tight end, big yak guy. Both TCU wide receivers are absolute units this year. He'd be kind of fun as well. So, okay. Heading over to the defense. Edge. It's tough because technically they have the bodies to line up and play right now. But if I'm talking about getting home with 4, it's a tier 1.5.
Yes.
Where like if you want to tell me they take one in the first round, wouldn't be shocked at all. You want to tell me that they just bring back Charles Omenihu and run it back with the edge group? I'm okay with that too. So I'm gonna put it at a tier 2, I guess, but I'll listen to tier 1. Like really what just needs to happen is you need Felix Anudike-Uzomah to continue to take steps forward. That's the best path here.
Mhm.
You've got 2 more years of control with George Karlaftis with the fifth year option. And then you can, if you want to tag him, you can kind of drag that out. Mike Dana's a ditch digger, nothing more, nothing less. But you need Felix Anudike-Uzomah to continue to take steps forward. That's the best path here, and the step that I think all of them would want to happen if they could pull a lever.
Yeah, and I think really how he plays over this offseason and kind of what they see out of him is going to determine what they end up doing there. Just I could really see Charles Omenihu being available late into the offseason, maybe right up until the season actually starts. Same thing with Mike Dana. I don't think anybody really sees, or not Mike Dana, excuse me. Who's the other defensive end that we're going to be dropping here? Treshawn Wharton, I guess, kind of a D lineman. Yeah. It's like, but yeah, I think both those guys are going to be, maybe not Treshawn Wharton, but there's going to be some availability with him late. And if they see FAU taking a step forward and they go, hey, we got, an athletic guy coming back, we really think FAU can step up, like 100% okay with them not taking anything crazy and, just kind of filling out the roster like they have been.
Yeah, and I think like one thing that's worth mentioning that we kind of I've seen some of the chat talk a little bit about here too is like the Chiefs, like their offensive needs, they've got all sorts of needs, right? Like they needed, especially if Kelsey retires, they need an outside X receiver. So like a Trey Harris or Jalen Royals, a little bit like that. Weston mentioned too, like and like someone mentioned bringing back Juju just for a ditch digger type of thing. Like yeah, like if Justin Watson comes back, I'm not gonna like storm the Capitol or anything, storm Arrowhead, I should say. But I'm not going to freak out because it's like, hey, they need someone who's just like can block and do the little stuff. Every team's got a 4th or 5th receiver. I'm okay with that. Interior defensive line, tier 1 need for me. You've got Chris Jones, and that's about it, right? Like there's a ton of free agents in Derek Nottie, Treshawn Wharton, Mike Pinnell, even some of the later guys that are just on down the roster, like they've got lots of holes there. And that's Marlon Tuipulotu. He's a free agent. Like he was on the practice squad. They've got Siaka Ika, a former 3rd round pick out of Baylor that was drafted by the Cleveland Browns, on the practice squad. He's a big guy. He's someone like I could see factoring into just being your 2 gapping, early down player, but they've got need. And they've got to get younger at that position too. And this is the class to do it, by the way. Great interior defensive line class. Tons of guys. Kenneth Grant. You've got Deion Walker from Kentucky, Tyleek Williams, and there's all sorts of different bodies. Alfred Collins. Like there's really like interior defensive line is really diverse. I will be shocked if they don't come out with the defensive tackle on day 1 or day 2. So tier 1 need for me.
Yeah, and same here. And again, you kind of just relating this back to my running back comments from earlier. It's like this is the draft class to do it. Somehow Veach does this great job of, it seems like 2 or 3 of the positions we absolutely have to have. It's the best possible draft for. So bring in a defensive tackle is going to be a necessity. There are plenty of them. And it's also why we're probably not going to be able to pay Trey Smith to come back because somebody is going to look at this draft class and go, there's monsters everywhere. Everybody's got one now. Okay. Deep interior defensive tackle position has never been stronger. That 3 tech, that Chris Jones, it's like, we got to have somebody. And the Bears are going to be like, here's $25,000 a year. Like bring them in, or the Vikings. And it's like, hey, here's $27 million per year.
You said 25,000, which is like,
25,000,
like a McDonald's salary. But okay. So linebacker for me, tier 2, I don't think Nick Bolton's coming back. I think that was pretty apparent when Drew Tranquil was signed. He will be the Mike. Leo Chanel will stay in the Sam. I do think that they'll bring a developmental guy in at the weak side position. And maybe they kind of double down and bring back Willie Gay or something like that, who's a free agent, again, who played that role. And I'm okay with that. Like Chris Paul Jr. out of Ole Miss, Jeffrey Bassa from Oregon. I really like Carson Schwesinger, the linebacker from UCLA. There's lots of guys. Linebacker is also a position that you don't want to rely on people in the rookie year. Like it's a developmental position. Very, very few linebackers come in are great from year 1. So I do think that they're definite draft need. And you also just need those guys to play special teams too. So I'm putting it as a tier 2 need. But I do think that they can line up and play today and probably be okay at linebacker.
See, I'm gonna say tier one, and there's a few reasons for that. I think that losing Nick Bolton is definitely a blow to the leadership, and I agree. I don't think that he's gonna be back unless he's playing for 10 mil a year or something really, really like something he would not consider as an offer. But when I look at the Chiefs defense and I see what they can't do well, and it's like guard tight ends, and you go, we needed somebody that was supposed to be what we brought. Man, I'm blanking on his name too. From the Chargers that we brought in, Drew Tranquil.
Yeah,
It's like that's kind of what he was supposed to be brought in for. Him kind of also as a thumper, but like he's supposed to be that guy that could be that coverage linebacker. It's like there are guys in this draft like Harold Perkins Jr. from LSU, who I'd love to see where everybody else has him ranked, but athletic, kind of a linebacker that can play that nickel or that sort of coverage linebacker that can come in and step in and take those snaps. Like I think if you get a guy like that in this draft that can step in and do that, I think that just takes this defense up another notch, which if you're taking that away too, it's like, man, there's two ways to attack this defense. It's a big wide receiver on the outside and it's with tight ends and running backs. It's like you take those away. What can you do? Genuinely, what can you do? And so just in terms of scheme, I'm putting it at tier one. I do think we have bodies that can come into play, but I also like Leo Chanel on the edge sometimes, man. And I don't know if you can do that.
He's a Swiss Army knife player. Like he can be used a lot of different ways. Okay, last two positions, corner. For me, I'm going to put that as a tier 2 need. I think right now, like it's a tier 3 need, but coming up, it will be a tier 2 need. You just got so many guys who are going to hit free agency at the same time. Joshua Williams, Jalen Watson, Najee Johnson. These are all guys who took, lots of snaps for you. So you got to start bracing for that. And also the Chiefs have kind of stopped being great at drafting corners here lately. Now, they haven't put a bunch into it, but you've got Kamal Haddon, who's a Packer now. Nick Jones, I think, is on the practice squad. It's been a while since they've hit on a corner, so it's time for them to do that again. So, again, like you take a corner in the first round, totally okay with it. There's some guys that I this isn't as deep of a corner class as there has been in previous class. I know you love Jahdae Barron. Totally agree with that, by the way. But like Siobhan Ravel is a name that like could be there at 32. I don't know if he fits what they do necessarily. Like he's a little bit more of a smaller off man corner rather than a press man corner. But there's corners are really kind of your cup of tea, like what you like, what you don't like sort of thing. So, but for me, corner is a tier 2 need.
Yeah, and I'd agree. I love Chevron Revel. It's really a shame that he got injured because I think that he could have really put together a super awesome season. It's like, but the Chiefs are so strict on their qualifications to be a corner that it's kind of like, man, I would love him on the Chiefs, but I'm not a DB coach for the Chiefs, so probably not going to happen. But yeah, tier two. Would love another wide defensive back that can step in the nickel or step outside and let Trent McDuffie. Like,
yes, yeah,
that's why I love the Texas DB so much. But yeah, tier 2.
He's got some flexibility to him too. Like he played outside this year, but has played in the slot before. There's some guys out there. Lastly, safety. I'm going to put safety as a tier 3 need, especially because I do think that there are some real studs in the safety class. Andrew Mabuka, the safety from Texas. Nick Iwanmori is like a really fast riser. I think he's going to blow up the combine. He's an inbox guy, kind of like a Jaden Hicks sort of thing. So I'm not necessarily sure what his fit would be on the Chiefs. Malachi Starks, Xavier Watts. There's some really talented safeties in this class. But I do agree. There was a comment up here, and I'm trying to see who it was. They brought up a good point. I'm not sure you can lose Nick Bolton and Justin Reed in the same offseason. Like those are like the eyes and brain of the defense, right? So maybe they bring one of those guys back. If you told me Justin Reed's back, boom, you just like wipe off safety as a need at all. And Justin Reed, I think, is still playing a game that you can bring back and be okay with it. I do want them to get younger. I do want them to get more explosive. But what he does, he plays closer to the ball. And he tackles his ass off. Like Tyrann Mathieu, it was kind of time for him to leave Kansas City, partially because like it was never a tackler, right? Like the shift that Steve Spagnuolo made. Nate Tice was talking about this. Like he's like, nothing told me more about what the Chiefs were doing on defense than when they moved on from Tyrann Mathieu and went and got Justin Reed, because the total opposite players, right? And like Justin Reed, if there's a way that they can bring him back, boom, you just cross safety off your draft list entirely. Traditionally, that's what the Chiefs do in free agency, by the way. They're going to want to basically cross off things off their list. So like, hey, if we don't come out of this with a tackle, if we don't come out of this with a safety or something, we're going to be okay. And that's traditionally how they tackle free agency. And don't be surprised if they do it. Also, Talafanoa Hufanga is total profile for the Chiefs. He's 25. He's a great safety, a ball player, makes plays on the ball, safety from 49ers. They're not going to be able to pay him. That wouldn't be a name that I'd be surprised. Like, a hell of a tackler. He plays with his hair on fire and has wonderful hair. Very Troy Polamalu-esque with the hair. I wouldn't be shocked if he's here in Kansas City. That's just the Justin Reed thing again. A young guy, still got upside left. Wouldn't be shocked at all.
Yeah, that would be fantastic signing. And I agree, man. Like, you look at how Jaden Hicks was playing late into the season, and you look at that DB, that safety group, and you go, I think we're going to be okay no matter what happens. Like, tier 3 for me as well. I think you'd like to see, oh man, I'm really blanking on names today, man. That DB we had, that third safety role that went to the Commanders. I'm trying to remember what his name was.
Kendall Fuller?
Kendall Fuller, yes.
Yeah, well, yeah, he was like a corner, but actually ended up playing safety when the injuries started piling up, and really played safety in the Super Bowl, which was kind of cool.
I would love to see another player like that can come in and do what he was doing, because I really think that kind of changed the aspects of what you could do on defense. So I'd love to see him add somebody that could do that. But you don't need that. That's the best part about the safety group right now, is it's like you have your heir apparent with Jaden Hicks. I think he can step up and do most of what Justin Reed did.
If they put McDuffie back in the slot, you can start running Shamari Connor out of the slot, or at safety as well too, which maybe he's the replacement for Brian Cook the year after. So they've done a nice job of giving themselves a runway at safety, which is good. It's like traditionally not a position that you want to shell out big cash for. So
and they do such a good job at drafting it too. Like, it seems like we haven't had a horrible safety in 5 years.
Yeah, and good for them. Good for them. That's somewhere that they do it. And being bad at safety, it's one of those things, like, no one cares about roadside assistance for their car until they have a flat tire, and then they really wish they had it, right? Or a warranty on their appliances or whatever, right? No one really cares about safety until it's a problem, and then it's a really big problem. So that's going to do it for us here today on the Intangibles. Real quick before we go, though, leading up to the draft, we're going to do this every single time. Christian, with the 31st pick in the NFL draft, the Kansas City Chiefs select
Jahdae Barron, Texas defensive back. And I might have talked about him already, but the more I watch him, I just fall in love with this dude. He's a little bit older, only a 3-star coming out of high school, but he has just like taken over my conversations as DBs that the Chiefs could look at. Can be in the slot, can be on the outside, can play that third safety role. Like, absolutely a baller too, man. Like, 3 forced fumbles over this past year, 20 passes deflected. How many picks? I think he led the league in picks this year. Don't have that stat with me, but yes. Yeah. Like, you look at Trent McDuffie and you say, hey, like, this is a guy that plays in the slot that could step up, be physical in the run game. Like, you see that part of Jahdae Barron's game where he's not afraid to put his nose down and hit somebody. And then you look at the ball skills and you go, oh, like, I don't think that he will be better than Trent McDuffie, but you see aspects of his game that Trent McDuffie hasn't shown. And if you're like, dude, I'm looking for a 1-2 punch here with cornerback, and one of my guys gets, I think it was like 8 picks in the year. It's like, yeah, 8 interceptions, 20 passes deflected, 3 forced fumbles. It's like, I need somebody to take the ball away. Jahdae Barron's that dude. He will do that for you. And Trent McDuffie will lock them up. He can shadow. And I just really think that would tie the DB core together. And he's probably going to be there at 32, which I think is important to note.
For reference, since we're doing this every week, like, he might just keep his answer as Jahdae Barron for the rest of time. We're trying to get it right? We're trying to narrow down those names, because honestly, I think you can kind of get to a pool of players where it's like, hey, I think these are the players that they could take at 31. With the 31st pick in the NFL draft, the Kansas City Chiefs select Nick Scorton, edge, Texas A&M. I think there's a chance he'll be there. Arm length is a little bit of concern. He's not a body type that everyone's going to like. I think that he might be closer to like a 3-4 defensive end. Big guy, like 6'4", 285, long arms, similar profile to Charles Omenihu. I could see him falling down the board if some quarterbacks get pushed up. I think some people will fall in love with some other players in this draft. And if he's at 31, Spags is taking him. He is. If you go back to his tape at Purdue, I think he would have been a top 10 pick. And that's where he's projected early mocks. He's starting to fall down the board a little bit. He's not making it past the Chiefs. They will love his profile. Strong run defender, big, powerful frame, long, tall. Nick Scorton, if he's at 31, he's a Chief. That's going to do it for us today here on the Intangibles. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to stick with us all throughout the draft cycle as we get closer and closer to the big day. Thank you for listening to Arrowhead Addict. Thank you to producer Richard, who does an awesome job. And thank you, Christian, for joining me. Have a great weekend, and we will see you next week. Go Chiefs.